Wonderful. It is 4:01 p.m. on October 28th, 2021. ACWD board meeting is being called into session. Before we jump into the agenda, I'll turn it to Mr. Stevenson to see if he has any housekeeping items for today.
Thank you, President Akbari. Brief comments. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this special meeting of the ACWD Board of Directors. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this special board meeting by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. This special board meeting will focus primarily on two topics. We have a public hearing related to the district's transition from at-large to district-based elections. And then we'll continue our financial workshops with a review of final topics related to water rates. There'll be some pauses along the way for members of the board and members of the public to ask questions and engage with the board. If you're participating via Zoom, we ask that you mute your microphones unless you're speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the Assistant District Secretary, and the Assistant District Secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view the presentation materials as they're presented to the board. And at any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we'll be sure to give you an opportunity to speak up at the appropriate time. If you are participating via telephone audio, you may download the presentation slides from the district's website at www.acwd.org. But we ask that you please put your phone on mute to ensure the best sound quality for everyone. And if you're using the Zoom app on your telephone, Zoom allows you to use your dial pad *6 to mute and unmute yourself and *9 to raise your hand. People participating by telephone will also be given an opportunity to address the board. So this virtual board meeting is being recorded and will be made available for the public for future viewing. And President Akbari, those complete my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Can we do roll call, please?
Directors Weed.
Here.
Gunther.
Here.
Huang. Here. Sethi.
Here.
And Akbari.
Here. Director Huang, will you lead us in the salute to the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, public comments on matters on this notice of special meeting. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? You can do so by raising your hand in the Zoom app or letting us know in the chat function on Zoom. I am not seeing any hands raised in the Zoom app, and I don't see anything in the chat feature. Marianne, can you confirm that we don't have anyone in the chat?
That's correct, that we don't have any comments.
Okay, wonderful. In that case, we will move on to item 4, our public hearing to receive public input on the transition from at-large to zone-based elections to create 5 zones for members of the Board of Directors pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this public hearing. The purpose of this hearing is to inform the public about the process to establish 5 zones or voting districts that are compliant with all voting laws and best practices, and to receive input from the public and stakeholders on what factors should be taken into consideration when creating the new voting zones. This is the second of 2 public hearings for this purpose. The first public hearing was conducted on October 14th, 2021. Following the conclusion of this second public hearing, the district's demographers will create 1 or more draft maps based upon the process and factors to be presented this evening. There will be 3 additional public hearings to present the draft maps, potential election sequencing, and receive further public input. These 3 additional public hearings will be scheduled in the near future, and notice for these 3 public hearings will be published and posted on the district's website. At the last public hearing, the board will consider the approval of a final map and election sequencing. The board welcomes your input on this important process, and again, we thank you for your participation. Now I'd like to review the ground rules for this public hearing. I will open the public hearing and ACWD staff will make some brief remarks, followed by a presentation from the district's demographers who will ultimately prepare the draft voting district maps to share with the board and the public to receive public comment. The presentation materials can be viewed online through the Zoom app or can be accessed on the district's website with the agenda and materials for this meeting at acwd.org. Upon conclusion of the presentation, the board and the district's demographers will receive public comments and input. Upon conclusion of the public comments and input, the board will request input from staff, general counsel, and the district's demographers as needed to respond to questions or comments that are raised by the public, and then I will close the public hearing. Each person will be given 5 minutes to comment. We'll require strict compliance with this time limit so that everyone is treated the same way. The Assistant District Secretary will provide you with 30 seconds advance warning and will let you know when time has expired. Since this hearing is being conducted online and by teleconference, persons who wish to make comments can do so, can indicate that they wish to do so by raising their hand in the Zoom app, submitting your comments or questions in the chat feature in the Zoom, or by speaking up verbally when we open the public comment portion of this hearing. When making public comments, please be sure to unmute your own phone line or computer microphone so that you may be heard. We ask that you please state your name and service address when making a comment, though providing this information is of course voluntary. The public hearing is now open. Staff will now provide some brief remarks followed by a presentation by the district's demographers. I ask you to please refrain from asking questions or making comments until I open the public comment portion of the public hearing. And with that, I will pass it off to our general manager, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, President Akbari. And before we begin, I just wanted to provide a little bit of additional context for this public hearing. The board of directors are currently elected at large in accordance with the district's enabling legislation. The California Voting Rights Act prohibits the use of at-large elections if it impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election. Numerous public agencies, including ACWD, have been contacted by private law firms alleging violations of the California Voting Rights Act in a push to move agencies to district-based or zone-based election systems. While the district does not agree with those allegations, the board has begun the process of moving toward a zone-based election system. To do this, the district has engaged a demographer who will receive input from the public and from the board regarding communities of interest and other factors that should be considered, along with the recently released 2020 federal census data in the process of drafting potential zones. This evening's public hearing is the second of 2 public hearings for this purpose. The district published notice of the public hearing on its website and social media, and in the East Bay Times on October 1st and October 8th, and in the Tri-City Voice on October 5th and October 12th. And as of 4 p.m. this evening, the district has not received any written comments to be considered here tonight. But at this time, I'd like to introduce the district's demographer, Shelley Lapkoff of Lapkoff and Gobelet Demographic Research Incorporated, who will present the process and the factors involved in developing the zone maps and the input requested from the public through this process. So Shelley, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at this second public hearing. I'm going to share my screen, and there's a lot of information that I have to provide tonight, some of which we went over in the last public hearing, but some is new as well. So tonight, can everybody see my screen? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Tonight, I'll go over the background, a little bit about the background, though we've just covered a lot just now. Then the legal requirements as we understand them. We'll discuss communities of interest, which are an important factor in drawing lines, and end with more information for the public, where they can get more information. Now, background is that, as Mr. Stevenson just said, the California Voting Rights Act has encouraged many jurisdictions to move from at-large to by-district elections. The Alameda County Water District did receive a CVRA challenge letter, and this is why they are moving to by-district elections. On August 12th, there was a resolution passed to transition to by-district elections. Tonight is, or this afternoon is, the second of two initial pre-map meetings where we take input from the public before we start drafting maps. And we will show draft maps at subsequent meetings, public hearings. This is what we heard from the last public hearing, the meeting number 1. We heard testimony on communities of interest. There were 3 discussion items that I heard. One was that household income was a relevant factor to consider as a community of interest, because those with lower incomes will have more difficulty with rate increases. And later tonight, I will show you a map of household income from the census, recent census data. Second is that areas receiving water from different sources may be a community of interest. And third, that areas with different seismic settings may be a community of interest, because if we have an earthquake and it has differential impact on the district, that could create differential impact and therefore different communities of interest. The directors also had questions and also discussed the communities of interest and other matters. And what I heard was that there was an interest in understanding the Asian subgroups within the district. There was an interest in understanding the school district boundaries and the community college boundaries within Alameda County Water District. There is a concern about voter eligibility, that some people may not be eligible to vote, and some areas may have higher incidences of people not being able to vote than other areas, and the fairness of that. And there was also a discussion about Union Sanitary District election district boundaries, and could we possibly use their boundaries as we develop our own. Now, in terms of background, just to make sure everybody understands what we're doing, currently the board members are elected at large. That means everybody in the district votes for each board member. In by-district elections, each director must live in their particular election district, and only those people who live in that district would vote for that board member. When we draw the election districts, there are federal and state laws that apply. Sometimes the current directors do not live in we have sometimes 2 directors living in the same election district, leaving one election district vacant. Current directors, if that happens, current directors will complete their terms of office and they will be assigned to one of those vacant districts, and they will represent them. But once their term of office ends, then they need to run in the district in which they live. The newly created zones will be in use through 2030. And when the new census comes out, you can reevaluate your districts and see if they are still even or whether you have to adjust them. Here is the your boundary, your district boundary with the cities on them, Union City, Fremont, and Newark. There is some portion of Hayward, but it is unpopulated in terms of residences. There was some discussion at the last public meeting, last public hearing, that you had a small group of customers in Hayward. And you do have customers in Hayward, but from what we could tell, they were all business owners, businesses. And so when we're doing the districting, we only look at the people who actually live in the district. So in terms of creating the election zones or districts, we'll look at total population. And there is no total population, there's no population, residential population in Hayward. So I wanted to clarify that for the board. But this gives you an idea of the size, population size of your three cities, Fremont, Union City, and Newark. I also wanted to indicate some other data that we have from the census and from the statewide database. In the census, we have 348,283 people live in your district. The 18+ population, which is those of voting age, is less than that, obviously, 123 people. And then people eligible to vote would be citizens of voting age. And that is smaller at 221,684. And I should say that the citizens of voting age is an estimate because it's based on a small sample with high error rates of citizenship. And you may recall there was a lot of controversy when the census was coming out, whether to add the citizenship question. And it revolved around this, whether we needed a better measure of citizens of voting age. So just so you know, it's probably a good estimate for the district as a whole, but as we get more granular, the high error rates come into play because it's a survey. Then we have registered voters within Alameda County Water District and those that actually vote. This is from your county register of voters, and it was then processed by the statewide database. So these are very good numbers for the district as a whole. And you can see only 182,400 registered voters, and of those 147,730 actually voted in the last election. So there was a question at the last public hearing about the eligibility of voters. And I just wanted to give you a sense that this is not uncommon, that there would be a much smaller group of actual voters than there are population in the district. And here are summary statistics from the Census Bureau and the statewide database, which shows the race ethnicity of the population 18 and over, and citizens of voting age. And then for registered voters and actual voters, we're not asked what ethnicity we are when we register to vote, but the statewide database takes the last names of the voters and assigns whether they have an Asian surname or a Spanish surname. So it gives some idea, it's a proxy for Asians and Latino Hispanic populations. And then here is a map of the distribution of the race ethnicity of the total population. So you get a sense of the areas of the district that have protected minority groups. One concentration we see of Hispanics is in Newark. And there's also a concentration over here in Union City. So just as a demographer, I would look at that and say, oh, well, that may well be a community of interest. And part of the Federal Voting Rights Act is that we not divide protected minority groups. And I have information on Asian subgroups. There was some interest in Asian subgroups in the district. And I just wanted to show you the registered and actual voters by Asian subgroup. So Chinese are by far the most numerous of the Asian subgroups at 42% of both actual and registered voters. Indians are 31% of registered voters, 32% of actual voters, followed by Filipinos at 13% registered and 12% actual, Vietnamese at 9%, Koreans, and then Japanese. So that's, again, based on last names. We don't know if that's the actual ethnicity of the people, but it's a good indicator. And here is the breakdown, the geographic breakdown of the Asian subgroups. And one thing that strikes me is that the Asian subgroups don't feel that concentrated to me, that they're very integrated areas. I think, see if we have Filipinos are maybe concentrated in Union City. Yes, they're more concentrated in Union City, but you can see that, see, the Asian Indian are orange and the Chinese are purple. So they often live in the same area. And in the past, we've discussed that they may have different political cohesiveness, but given that they're in the same areas, it would be hard to separate them into different election districts. So there's some legal requirements that we have to follow. We need that the election districts be equal in population. We need to be mindful of the protected minority groups. And we need to make sure we don't gerrymander based on race. And there's some factors that are discussed in the state elections code to take into account when we're drawing plans. Now, just to get a sense of how large your election districts need to be, your total population at 348, 283 needs to be divided by 5 because you have 5 directors. So each zone's ideal population would be 69,657. So that's what we're aiming for, but it could be plus or minus about 3,500. So the difference between the most and least populous zone should be no greater than 6966 people. Now, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is such that if a protected group is sufficiently large, geographically compact to form a majority in a single member district, and they're politically cohesive, then the election districts must be drawn to protect those groups, to make sure that they can elect or influence the election, elect a representative of their choice or influence that election. In particular, we don't want to crack or pack is what it's called. We don't want to divide the minority groups, and we don't want to overly concentrate them. I don't think overly concentrating them is an issue in the district, but as we saw, there were some pockets of Latino populations, and so we need to be careful not to divide them. And here's an example of what you would ideally do. You would have the minority communities in separate districts, so they're not overly concentrated and that they are not divided. And there was also in the early 90s, we were getting some really bizarre plans, and we actually were around then and drawing districts, and we drew our share of bizarre plans as well, because before the Supreme Court decision, we were interpreting it that we should maximize the political power of the protected minority groups. But after Shaw v. Reno in 1993, they said, do not gerrymander on the basis of race. Do not make very oddly shaped districts just to maximize the political power of minority groups. So it's a bit of a balancing act now. California Election Code says that we should take in consideration the following factors when we are drawing plans: the topography of the district, the geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory. And getting more attention lately are communities of interest. Communities of interest are contiguous areas in which people share social and economic interests, and that they should be in a single election district because their community of interest may be affected by the policies of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors. So the question we have to the public is, what is your community of interest? And do members of your community want to be united in one election district or to be divided and have a voice in elections of multiple representatives? Here are examples of communities of interest: recognized neighborhoods, cities and unincorporated communities, areas with similar demographic characteristics, areas with similar issues, and sometimes school attendance areas. Here's, this is new from the last public hearing. This is a map of household income, and it suggests where areas, the lighter green is areas with less income. And we were discussing last time that this area here around Newark and extending into Fremont might be an area with low socioeconomic status. And there is a census tract here with very low income. We also have some pockets here of low income. So this gives some sense of what we can tell from the census data on median household income. So I think this corresponds to our intuitive understanding of the district as well. Here is a map of the school districts within Alameda County Water District. They very closely follow the city limits. I think Newark Unified is exactly the same as Newark, as a matter of fact. So I don't know that this gives us much direction or much difference than looking at city boundaries. There's also a discussion about using the Ohlone College trustee areas, and they are in the process also of moving from at-large to by district election of trustees. So we do not have any trustee areas to mimic yet of theirs because they're just going through the process themselves as well. And I wanted to remind everyone that when we comply with the laws, there are trade-offs, and it's really hard to simultaneously optimize everything. That is our goal, but we can seldom optimize everything. So what we do is give you the trade-offs. We try and be objective and give you the pros and cons of each plan that we would draw for you. If the public would like more information, you can go to the website and you can submit questions and comments as well. And this slide shows you where to go on the website. There's also a panel on the website. It's very easy to see of where it says, I believe, transition to zone-based election systems. So that it's very easy to find on the Alameda County Water District website. And that concludes my presentation for this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Lapkoff. I will now open up the public comment portion of the hearing. Anyone who would like to make public comments can do so by raising their hand in the Zoom app, submitting your questions or comments in the chat feature in Zoom, or by speaking up verbally when invited to do so. Is there anyone who wishes to make a comment? Looks like we have a hand raised from Mr. Kelly A. Mr. Kelly A, you have 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you. There are many, several local agencies that are redistricting right now, and their mistakes or and what they're doing is instructive. The East Bay Park District has wards very similar to the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, and both of them have gerrymandered them in similar ways in some cases, some areas, especially around Fremont, very similar gerrymandering right here. The Alameda County Board of Supervisors has some consultants, and they have consultants. They have held several hearings, but the Park District hasn't held any hearings and doesn't have any consultants. So you can see that your group, your agency is ahead of the game. You have consultants and you're holding hearings. They like to make certain mistakes that are very even obvious mistakes that are but because they got them away with them before, and they may try to do them again. The Reservoir Hills near Highland Hospital has a pocket almost completely isolated, just an enclave, and surrounded by other districts and disconnected from its main district, which is in Berkeley. The East Bay Mud has carved off a part of San Ramon into a separate little island, combined it with Norris Canyon Estates and Castro Valley. So it's off on its own in nowhere land, but it's called part of a bigger district, much bigger district in Castro Valley. And the other, it's surrounded by the rest of San Ramon. So it's very, very crazy stuff that they do. All these agencies are directing their staff and consultants to give preference to the existing district boundaries. And mainly they may want to ensure that no two directors will ever have to run against one another in the same district. And they're to one degree or another, they're arm twisting their consultants and telling them how to draw the lines and to base them on some funny looking gerrymandered maps from 10 years ago and so on. And as you can tell, I don't think you're doing any of those things here today. And your consultant is far and away the best at looking at things. As far as how to draw the lines, I would suggest maybe keeping cities together to some degree, like Union City, like Newark. Newark might have to be expanded a little bit to include some other areas to be big enough, but maybe it could all be together, and then draw some more boundaries as needed. And as far as school district boundaries, I'd also suggest that nobody cares about the school district, but it's all the same. But people will pay big money to move into a different high school. And these high school boundaries, there's only about, I don't know, a handful of high schools in the school district, and which one you get is worth big money to the property owners and to the renters, I imagine. So I would suggest taking a close look at those and letting your consultants go to work. I think they're going to do a great job. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment or ask a question at this time? Mr. Kennan.
Thank you, President Akbari. I'll be brief in my comments because I believe the demographers have captured most of what I am about to say. Yes, so I believe the demographers have already noted these factors, but to be complete, in addition to the statutory primary factors to be used to determine zone boundaries, secondary considerations should include geographic cohesiveness, variations in the aesthetic attributes of the water received, for example, hardness, geographic variations in infrastructure and infrastructure reliability, and lastly, geographic variations in socioeconomic status, including perceived and actual elasticity to water rates. To the previous comment input from the public, school school boundaries, of course, have no bearing on water except for the tie-in to the last point that I made, which are it is very true that school district boundaries do impact the cost of the housing and therefore the socioeconomic composition of those that are living within the school district. So I do see a positive correlation between school district boundaries and the geographic variations in the socioeconomic status, which I have just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment or ask a question? Hearing none and seeing no hands raised in the Zoom app, I will ask the Assistant District Secretary, have we received any written comments?
We have not received any written comments.
Thank you. Does any director have any questions of staff, general counsel, our demographers, or other directors based on the comments that were received today?
This is Director Sethi. I do have some questions and a couple of comments.
Yes, Director Sethi.
May I go ahead?
Absolutely.
So among the, I would really like to be a little bit more knowledgeable about the agencies in our service area that are going through redistricting. You mentioned Ohlone College. Is this true for Washington Hospital Healthcare System too? Is it true for Union Sanitary District?
I'm unaware of Washington Hospital District. They might be going through. We could check that out.
Yeah, if the board's interested in understanding the status of other agencies, that's things, we can look into that.
I would like to know whether Union Sanitary District has been challenged at all. I'm just asking whether it's a fact or not.
Okay, we can look into that. Also, with respect to Union Sanitary District, I would like to know whether they are in compliance with CVRA. So, comments. Yesterday, I was attending the Fremont Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee, which I've been a member of for quite a number of years. And so they've been tracking redistricting pretty much for the city of Fremont. But it was brought up yesterday, and we are going to have a special meeting next week where the chamber is going to try to provide some input to the community for alignment of boundaries around certain districts. For example, with ACWD with 5 members and close to 70,000 voters in each area or each by district area, we have a little bit of a complement on the city side with Fremont with 2 council members, each representing about 35,000 people, aside from the mayor who's elected at large. So to the extent that you can align district boundaries as closely as possible, this is what the chamber is looking at as a group. That you have maybe 2 council members per ACWD and USD board member, so that it's in a complementary area as closely as possible. That you take into consideration the school district boundaries as well. And then with Washington Hospital with 5 directors and Ohlone College try to do the same thing, so that you don't end up with the balkanization of the entire community into different fragments where voters are confused as to who actually is representing me. That if you understood basically that this is my water board member, these are my 2 council members, this is my USD board member, Washington Hospital, Ohlone College, that this would be a positive development for the community. So we are meeting, this special meeting is not open to the public. It's only the Government Affairs Committee and chamber members next Wednesday, November 3rd.
And so we can expect some output or input from that committee toward redistricting in the area. I just wanted to share that.
Okay. John Weed, a quick comment. I recall many years ago in one of the classes being, I was still in law school, they were talking about drawing lines. And the comment was made by a professor saying that it was his experience that better government was one that did not have a similar lines for various districts, that you did not build a political structure where people ran as a team for different offices, that it was better from a governance standpoint to have a type of a matrix that you would jump around. You weren't necessarily in a specific zone and all the districts lined up on that zone. Now, that has to, everything has to be in balance here, but it's one of those thoughts I had following the last meeting where I raised the issue of what are the other districts doing. The second point is Ohlone College, when it was established in their enabling legislation, had 2 seats in Newark and 5 in Fremont. Later, it was determined that was not equitable, so they expanded the Newark zone to the west side of Interstate 880. And currently, 2 of the seats are west of 880. The other 5 seats are east of 880. Now they're going into individual, they're in the process of redistricting again with individual seats. So my 2 thoughts. Thank you.
Question for Shelley. Maybe I think I missed this. The census, when they determine the Asian community, is there a box on the census that you check Asian, Hispanic?
Yes.
Okay. So my concern is, and it's not, it's a very minor issue in that with the Filipino community, for instance, how do you, would you differentiate? Is there a differentiation in, let's say, the name Santos from Hispanic versus Filipino?
Yeah, so the census itself, we aren't relying on last names. We're relying on self-reporting of people. So somebody first marks whether they are of Hispanic or Latino origin, and then they mark what race they are. So if they, the Filipino population presumably would say they are not Latino or Hispanic, and then they would mark that they're Filipino. So that data is good, that, you know, we have that. The problem is on the data we have from the census for the purpose of redistricting, we just have Asians combined. We don't have the Asian subgroups. We get the Asian.
Okay, I think your numbers are fine. Knowing the demographics, particularly where I live, Union City tends to be heavily Filipino regards, and it appears to show that way. I'm just wondering if that was being mixed in a little bit, although there is a large Latino community over here as well. And it's a non-issue, I think. I agree with Director Sethi. We should try to maintain, you know, boundaries as best we can based on council positions or, you know, districts, cities. I know Union City, not because I live here, but Union City likes being their own entity effectively. And if you look at Union Sanitary, you do have a director, Union City. You also have a director, Newark, who I believe Director Juan happens to be in her district. The problem then really resides to the other 3. Union City is not in Ohlone College, we're in Chabot. So I think that could pose using Ohlone. Great, you could use that for the seats, but you would leave out all of Union City. I think almost all of Union City is in Chabot College, but it might be useful for the other seats. And I do agree that we should look at trying where we can to ensure the boundaries kind of coincide. It's not going to be perfect, but if we can, it does bring a degree of, it'll lessen the degree of confusion if we have, you know, people voting for council members. Well, I'm voting for, you know, I got this district for ACWD, I've got this district for school board, and then they talk to their neighbor and there's something different. And good luck. But you know, like I said, I think Newark fairly easy, Union City fairly easy. The numbers actually appear to align. Fremont, if we could make those lines kind of line into maybe communities, because there are, hopefully I'm not mistaken on this, 5 Warm Springs, Niles, you know, Centerville. Those are very historic boundaries. Problem is there's 5 of them. Irvington and Warm Springs is growing by leaps and bounds. So I guess good luck. It looks like we're going, I think, down the right path. The numbers are interesting. And thank you.
If I may build on Director Gunther's comments here. First of all, I'd like a clarification. Director Wong, I apologize if I don't know this for certain, but do you live in Fremont or Newark?
I live in Fremont, but one of the words for Union Sanitary District actually includes North Fremont on the west side of A80. So there's a portion of Fremont, Ardenwood specifically, actually technically is North Fremont, but is west of A80 and is part of Union Sanitary District's Newark ward. I
see. So Pat Kite represents you over there.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So for our demographers, City of Fremont is expected to have their maps out by the beginning of December. I would ask that we be observant of their schedule for releasing maps and what those divisions look like. And also, I'm not saying we should do this, but just based on where each of our current 5 directors live, I could foresee that I'm in the Irvington High School attendance area. You know, you might want to take a look at that. Then John is in Mission San Jose. Aziz is in the Washington High School attendance area and American. And then you have a combination of Newark and Ardenwood, something like that. And the Kennedy High School, I'm sorry, American High School and Newark Memorial High School's attendance areas combined. But I would really encourage us, let's make sure that Union City stands alone by itself. When we look at these demographic numbers that you're presenting to us, we're within less than 1,000 votes of that perfect 69,500, whatever it is. And so I would ask us, let's maintain Union City as one entity if we can, and then we absorb the differential number of votes among the other 4 directors. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment too on that. You know, I am involved a little bit in the Union City politics because I live over here. And I think we might end up being the largest population group if you did that. However, my understanding of the local politics in Union City is they would prefer to keep it as a whole versus carving one small portion of Union City out, putting it in, let's say, a Newark district or a Fremont district. I think they would prefer that Union City, and this also holds to the concept of the election confusion, that, you know, we stay as a whole city. I believe the numbers would put us certainly one of the larger of the groups, but I also believe that locally that would be okay with everybody over here. I don't know of anybody over in Union City that would say, well, you know, the Union City's got 70,000 people and this district over here in Fremont only has 65. Why are we represented less percentage wise? Just letting you know that. I think that's fine.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none. It is now 4:51 p.m. and I will conclude the public hearing. The public hearing is now closed, and we thank everyone for their participation and input during this process. With that, that concludes item 4 on our agenda. We'll move on to item 5, the financial workshop for calendar year 2021. And I'll turn it to our general manager, Mr. Stevenson, to kick us off.
Thank you, President Akbari. This is the 5th in a series of financial workshops scheduled for calendar year 2021. The first 2 workshops focused on the district's budget, and this workshop is the 3rd of 3 scheduled workshops that focus on the district's current and projected financial status, water rates and charges, rate setting requirements, including cost of service analysis and the allocation between fixed and variable charges, charges for dedicated fire service lines, stage rates that could be utilized to maintain financial stability during a water shortage emergency, and the use of property tax rolls for the billing and collecting of delinquent accounts. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Finance, Mr. John Wunderlich, who can get us started on this topic.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson, and good evening, members of the board, members of the public, and staff who are here with us today. I'll be kind of doing the very beginning and very end of the presentation this evening, but Mr. Alm, our financial analysis supervisor, will be doing the bulk of the presentation. We also have representatives here from Raftalis, Sanjay Gar, and Kevin Kostuk, who have been with us at the prior workshops. They do not have a planned section of this evening's presentation, but they are here and available to answer any questions the board may have that would be appropriate for them to respond to. All right, can we move to the next slide? And so we've covered a number of topics already, which I'll recap momentarily. And so really the main reason we are here this evening is to receive board feedback and direction regarding the approach to applying a 3% rate increase, and specifically whether that's applied uniformly to fixed and variable charges or whether it's focused more on one side of that equation or the other. Next slide. And so I will quickly recap the discussions that we've had in August and September, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Aum, who will review some data and policy considerations related to fixed variable revenue recovery. And I think the plan is to try to, move through this at a somewhat brisk pace, although we can always stop and take questions, of course. But I think the idea is to then get to the more comprehensive discussion at the end of how exactly we want to apply a rate increase. Next slide. Next slide. And so at the August 26th workshop, the board did provide direction on a number of topics related to its rates process. First on maintaining a uniform rate structure, which means that all customers pay the same amount for each unit of water consumed. Reinstating water shortage emergency stage rates. They were previously adopted by the board, but had expired. And obviously with the current drought conditions, that will be an essential tool in our financial management if it becomes necessary to declare a water shortage emergency. We also received direction to formally update our cost of service study. Of course, that update is being performed by Raftalis, as well as, based on the metrics in our financial planning model and our underlying assumptions, to implement a 3% annual rate increases for the next 2 years. All right, next slide. We discussed a number of topics at the September 23rd workshop as well. and the relevant direction from that workshop was to maintain maximum flexibility to work directly with our customers as it relates to collections processes. And so that means reinstating district managed processes once state arrearages funding is received. Just a quick update on that. We do anticipate submitting our application to the state next week. And, we won't know the exact dollar amount until we run that month-end report out of the system on Monday. But I do expect that we'll be asking for something in the range of $1 million to $1.5 million, which we would expect to receive, and which will hopefully get us back more to a normal level, kind of more of a historical normal level of past due balances. The decision or direction was also provided to continue to bill the service charge as part of the regular bi-monthly bill, as well as to utilize a standard per unit of water stage rate, as well as add a couple of scenarios based on potential state mandates for conservation at 15% and 25%. And I think we had some kind of awkward numbering on some of those. And so I think what we're planning to do is a stage 2A would be asking for 15% conservation, and a stage 2B would be asking for 20%, and then a 3A would be asking for 25%, and a 3B would ask for 30%. Is kind of what we're looking at. And then we also at the last meeting added some funding, some preliminary estimate of funding that will be needed for future PFAS treatment was added into the financial plan. There was also some discussion about the Help on Tap program, as well as reevaluating the use of third-party collections for unpaid final bills. Those will be presented at a future meeting. And so what we'd really like to do is get the state arrearages funding in and see where exactly that leaves us. And then come back to the board with a comprehensive update on those topics. All right, next slide. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Alm to talk about fixed and variable revenue recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Wonderlich. Good evening, members of the board, members of the public and staff. As Mr. Wonderlich indicated, what we will focus on in this presentation is review the data and policy considerations related to fixed variable revenue recovery. We will review bill comparison among various agencies, impact of the increase in metered consumption as a result of the AMI project, review the fixed variable rate scenarios and the potential rate increase approaches and their impact on customer bill. Next slide, please. So we would like to start by briefly showing the rate setting policy objectives that the board previously reviewed and the ranking by the board. These are the common policy objectives that relate to water rates and rate structures in general. Conservation, funding mechanism, affordability, customer control, equity and allocation methodologies, and administration. Next slide. Here's a summary of the ranking by the board, sorted from the most important to the least. The three most important policy objectives are equity and allocation methodologies at the top, funding mechanism, and affordability, customer control. Conservation was not the driver when the board reviewed this in 2018. That doesn't mean that conservation is not important. It just wasn't ranked as high as the other three policy objectives. Oops. Staff completed an annual survey of the customer water bills for 30 water providers in the region. We update this on a regular basis. This chart shows the result from the most recent survey of the bi-monthly bill for a typical household. Since the district did not change rates in 2021, ACWD is now number 5 most affordable, with a bi-monthly bill of $130.15. The median bill for agencies surveyed is $157.10. The district is well below the median. This is the same chart as the previous one, except this is ranked in terms of the service charge from the highest to the lowest The service charge is represented by the dark blue shade on the left, so we rank from the highest to the lowest. As you can see here, the median service charge is $56.61, which is ACWD's service charge. But ACWD's total bill of $130.50 is well below the median. This chart shows the percentage of the bill that is the service charge and commodity charge. The median fixed charge for the agency survey is 34% of the total bill. ACWD's fixed charge is approximately 43% of the bill for a typical household. So as you know, the AMI project is going on right now, and when the project is fully implemented, we anticipate some increase in metered consumption. There's some discussion of how much we should assume. There was a study that shows that ultrasonic meters register flows ranging from 1.4% less to 3.1% more additional consumption. There's a study done by Coastside County Water District that reported a 5% to 8% additional registration. But we thought that that study was not as rigorous as the other study. We think the 3% increase in metered consumption would be a good assumption to make, given the data that's available. And that's what we assume in the district's financial planning model. Currently, only a small percentage of district customers already have ultrasonic meters, so we will have much better data to analyze for the next rates process once most meters are replaced. At the August workshop, the board discussed the impact of the AMI project on revenue and requested additional information on the impact of the increase in meter consumption on customer bills. So we'll take a look at that in the next few slides. Before we get to that, this slide shows how the additional revenue from the proposed 3% rate increase is allocated. A 3% rate increase is estimated to generate about $3.6 million in additional revenue. That's allocated to employee compensation, capital projects, water purchases, and operations and maintenance, as shown on the slide. Revenue from the rate increase does not go towards paying the debt service or developer reimbursed projects. This pie chart illustrates how the additional revenues are allocated among different cost centers, such as source of supply, O&M, and capital projects. So this is looking at now the district's cost and revenue structure for the current fiscal year. As you can see on the cost side on the left, 45% of the cost is fixed, 28% is variable. On the revenue side, 40% of the revenue is fixed revenue without any water sales. That's taking the service charge plus property taxes. 49% of revenue is considered reliable. That's water sales up to the drought level. And only 11% of revenue is variable. So when we look at the district's cost and revenue structure, we can see that 45% of the cost is fixed and almost 90% of revenue is fixed and reliable. And 28% of the cost is variable, and only 11% of revenue is variable. This shows the cost and revenue structures for 3 different revenue scenarios. Cost of service study, 3% and 8% increase in meter consumption as a result of AMI. This is showing fiscal year 23-24, we jump ahead. That's when we anticipate the AMI project is fully implemented. So as you can see here on the cost side, 45% is fixed, 23% is variable. On the revenue side, you can see that the variable and reliable revenues remain consistent across all 3 scenarios. So now we're moving to showing the bill impact of the 3% and an 8% increase in metered consumption for a typical residential customer as a result of meter replacements. If we see a 3% more consumption, a typical residential customer can see their bill go up 1.7% or a little over $2 compared to the current bill based on the current rates. If you see an 8% more consumption, that customer can see their bill go up about $6 or 4.5%. The percent of their bill as a service charge or commodity charge is generally consistent across all three scenarios. As for a typical commercial customer, if you see a 3% more consumption, that customer can see their bill increase about $17 or 2.3%. If you see an 8% increase in metered consumption, that customer can see their bill increase about $46 or 6.2%. Again, when we look at the percentage of their bill as a service charge or commodity charge, they're generally consistent across all three scenarios. So staff also looked at bill impact for a typical residential and commercial customer based on different fixed variable revenue allocation scenario, since this is the focus of the presentation for this evening. Scenario one is the baseline scenario, which system-wide fixed charge revenue makes up 33.6% of revenue. Scenario two is the outcome if the 3% rate increase is focused on the fixed service charge. So 35.5% is the system-wide fixed charge revenue. Scenario three is the outcome if the 3% rate increase is focused on the commodity charge. And we also analyze the scenarios where fixed charge revenue makes up 40%, 50%, and 25% of system-wide revenue. This first chart shows the bill impact for a typical residential customer for each of the scenarios. For the baseline scenario, that's at the top, this is based on the cost of service study. The bill for a typical residential customer is $129.11. $55.57 is fixed charge and $73.54 is commodity charge. Now, if 3% rate increase is focused on the fixed charge, that's scenario two, that customer can see the service charge go up about 6% and the commodity charge go down 3%. If the 3% rate increase is focused entirely on the commodity charge, that customer can see their service charge go down 3% and the commodity charge up 1.5%. And then you can see in the table what the impacts are for the other three scenarios. For a typical commercial customer, for the baseline scenario, their bill right now, current bill is $746.06 with the fixed charge and commodity charge component, as you see there. For scenario two, this customer can see their service charge go up 6% and the commodity charge down 3%. Scenario three, that's applying the rate increase to the commodity. They can see the service charge go down 3% and the commodity charge up 1%. Again, the other scenarios, the impact of the other scenarios is shown on the table there. So this slide and the next couple of slides, we will look at the potential rate increase approaches. Now we're talking about the approaches and their impact on customer bill. The status quo financial scenario projects a 3% annual rate increases applied uniformly to the service charge and the commodity charge. The rate increases could be applied uniformly that way or focus on either the fixed service charge or the commodity charge. If the rate increase is not applied uniformly, we will need a revision to the cost of service analysis, and we have our consultant with us tonight to answer any question. This table shows three potential approaches for a 3% revenue adjustment and the bill impact for a typical residential customer. So if 3% increase is focused entirely on the service charge, this customer can see their service charge increase about $5 or 8.8%. And the total bill would go up, can go up about 3.8%. If the 3% increase is focused on the commodity charge, this customer can see their commodity charge go up 4.5%, and then the total bill up 2.6%. For a typical commercial customer, if the 3% increase is focused on the service charge, they can see the service charge portion of the bill go up 9.5%, and then the total bill up 2.2%. On the other hand, if the 3% is focused on the commodity charge, they can see their commodity charge increase 4.5%, and then the total bill up 3.5%. That concludes my part of the presentation, and I would like to turn it back over to Mr. Wanderley. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Alm. We're actually just about at the conclusion. Mr. Alm walked us through that pretty quickly. And so, the system-wide revenue recovery, as Mr. Alm referenced, is about 1/3 service charges. But that's a little higher for residential customers and a little lower for commercial customers. And so that's why, as he went through those scenarios, you see that a rate increase that's focused on service charges, maybe affects residential customers a little bit more, whereas a rate increase focused more on commodity charges is going to affect commercial customers a little bit more, just on how those breakdowns work out. And also last month, we did have a presentation from Raftalis on what the cost of service analysis looks like, and specifically if you were to break out residential and non-residential customers into different groups. And what their analysis found is that the current rates appropriately reflect the cost of serving those subcomponent groups, even though it is the same rates that apply to everyone. Next slide. And so as staff, in terms of, how might we approach distributing the rate increase based on the previously reviewed board policy objectives, we kind of looked at a uniform approach, an approach focused on the service charge, or an approach focused on the commodity charge, which approach seems to best align with the various policy objectives. And so, we've tried to illustrate that with the check marks here, more check marks, meaning better aligned. And so, kind of based on what we see here, we do think that a uniform increase does meet the previously, from several years ago discussed policy objectives. And so, in terms of the equity and allocation methodologies based on the analysis presented by Raftalis last month, although any approach would certainly be appropriate, the uniform approach would maintain the consistency based on what they presented last month. In terms of funding mechanism, that's really kind of code for revenue stability. Obviously the service charge approach is going to be the strongest there. And then in terms of, kind of customer control and affordability for low users, obviously if you focus on the commodity charge, is going to, kind of get the most check marks there. Of course, conservation and administration were not, kind of major considerations, tended to generally be the least important factors. And so, but obviously the uniform approach is kind of the middle ground approach on conservation. And then from an administration perspective, is the easiest certainly to explain to customers, and is the version that doesn't require changes to the cost of service study. But again, those were kind of the two least important priorities from prior discussions, and probably are not a driving factor in the discussion this evening. It's probably more the top three objectives. And so that concludes staff's presentation. Happy to answer any questions. And then once we complete the board discussion, then we'll kind of summarize where we're at in our next steps.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Sydney. Let me first open it up to members of the board for initial questions, and then I'll open it up for questions from members of the public.
Okay, John Weed, a couple of points. On the difference between positive displacement and ultrasonic meters, out of the box, you pointed out 1.5 to 3% difference. However, it's my understanding that positive displacement meters decrease their accuracy over time and decrease significantly. So the 5 to 8%, which was the experience others have expressed, may well be in concurrence with that information, that even if the new meters are 1.5 to 3% difference, over time it'll grow to 5 to 8%. And that was the experience of Glenn Reynolds at 8% when he put an new ultrasonic on his old in tandem. It may be worth our while, if we're going to have this hybrid system, to set up some areas in town where we can look at the various meters. The difference is even more significant when you go to the larger meters because of the less accuracy of the positive displacement the larger you get on low flows. We comment about conservation when we talk about stage rates. I suggest the real issue for staged rates, because they come after the fact, is revenue. If we have, it's a reactive, stage rates are reactive. If you have conservation, you lose revenue, so you put in stage rates to make up the revenue. Stage rates do not drive conservation. And moreover, we've not really seen much rate-based conservation effective in our area on the states, and including the studies that we were in that looked at tiered rates, there was no difference. Districts which do not have tiered rates have the same level of conservation that those who do have tiered rates, because conservation is driven by a different mechanism than rates. So hopefully that's not part of our discussion. We talk, and then predictability of revenue. We currently are saying that 28% of our cost, I think that may be a bit inflated, is related to variable cost, and yet 66% of our revenue. That's a 2.4 time markup, 240% markup of the commodity. That's huge. And how does that come into play? It's their inability to develop a budget that you can have confidence in. In 2015, coming out of the last drought, we adopted a budget on June 30th, expecting a 15% shortfall. We ended up with a 25% surplus. That's a 40% miss on a budget in 1 year. That is where the business practice comes into play, and why you have to maintain larger reserves than necessary, and why it's the best business practice to try and match your variable expenses with variable income and fixed expenses with fixed income. And that's been a mantra of mine for some time. So thank you.
I have some comments here as well. So I don't want to make a big issue of this, but I actually think I was mischaracterized in the ranking of these policy objectives. I was given a 1 on affordability, when in fact I was making the business case that I favor, which I thought would result in the best affordability. So instead of a 1, I think it should have been a 5, because I was putting a premium on that, but I was coming at it from a different direction. So we'll let it go. Let me speak from a global philosophical point of view, where I'm coming from, as to how we head forward with our water rates and the integration of, or the transition to AMI ultrasound meters. See, I remember really well what happened 20 years ago, and I think most of us do, when PG&E and Southern California was also going through the same thing with electricity rates going up. Then we went to these new AMI type meters for electricity, and the combination of the rate increases with the replacement of the new meters caused people's bills to really go up considerably. And then we went through the energy crisis, the electricity crisis that was partly responsible for the recall of our Governor Davis at the time. But people had a triple whammy in their life. They were getting these sharp rate increases from PG&E. Then the replacement of the meters caused a spike in their bill because it was recording their usage far better. And I think everyone remembers millions of people complaining at that time about what was going on. And then we had the electricity crisis, and it became a triple whammy for most people. So I'm very concerned that we're going through this transition right now where we're going to do rate increases on the commodity side, and then we're going to see additional recording of usage, which effectively is a rate increase, and the staff is already building in a 3% increase due to the transition to AMI. And then we may have to go to stage rates if we're in a long-term drought right now. And so you're seeing the same triple whammy happening all over again, but with our water service area. I provided to the staff engineering. I pretty much gave this to Mr. Stevenson when he was the head of engineering, and Mr. Egger. I had put together all of the studies I could find on AMI in the early stages of us considering going to some type of AMI, regardless of what type of meter it was. But most of the studies that I ended up giving to engineering, and they're not represented here in this financial presentation, showed much higher increases on consumption when the AMI meters were put in place. For example, San Francisco went to AMI over, I believe, about 10 years ago. And the lady who was the project manager for that, I believe, still works there. And when I talked to her a number of times, what San Francisco residents experienced was a 7 to 8% increase in their water bill on the commodity side. And the business case for Santa Barbara, city of Santa Barbara, was 5 to 6%. In some cases, it was up to 7%. If you looked at the Central Valley where they had transitioned to AMI, it was even higher because they had really, really old meters. And so I don't trust the studies that compare one type of positive displacement meter, which is relatively new, against a new ultrasound meter. To back up what I'm talking about here, there was an article in the Water Finance and Management magazine this past summer that really caught my eye. It's entitled Revisiting AMI's Business Case. And it illustrates in here, and I will just read this very short paragraph, some analytics and data integration tasks can be completed prior to an AMI implementation to help utilities with existing metering system efficiently and effectively prepare. As an example, here in figure 1, they show the number of meters with zero flow recorded on a monthly basis to benchmark the possible risk factors when transitioning to AMI and to drive analysis of possible existing failing meters. And so what they're looking for, or the result was here that they're showing, is an 8% zero read, which is primarily driven by the inability of the old meters to record low flows in the system. So any increase that we make right now to the commodity side, which I'm opposed to, but if approved by the board, is only going to be compounded by an effective rate increase on the better recording of consumption by our customers. And then if we have to go to stage rates, it's compounded even further. So we are not able to help people on the consumption side as we are with our Help on Tap program. Our Help on Tap program can reduce a person's fixed charge immediately if they qualify under the program, and we can expand that program. And we know from, I brought it up in a couple of recent meetings, there are additional revenue sources that we can use to fund Help on Tap. So I would encourage us to look at only increasing the service charge to meet our revenue, desired revenue levels on our outlook, our future financial forecasts. And it's very important for the board to consider the fact that the finance staff is already including a 3% increase in revenue due to AMI. So we're putting 3% on top of the 3% that the staff is already including in the financial forecast. That I'm opposed to. So I would like to go back to one slide. I think it's slide 19 on the commercial side. Is that the, I think it's the next slide, 19. No, 19. There we go. So here, I'll bring up my last point. We are showing that currently our commercial customers, or CII, are paying about 23% or 22% of their bill is on the service charge. Here is an area where I think we can substantially increase the service charge for CII. And I don't think it's going to make any bit of difference to these customers. And I would ask that we take a look at 100% increase on the service charge. And second, let's examine putting that on the property tax bill so that we can build up a learning experience before we go out to residential customers. But putting CII on the property tax bill should be a no-brainer here. And it should be a no-brainer to increase the service charge to these customers by at least 100% and put that on the property tax bill. And I would ask that the staff formally consider my request here and come back to the board at some future point where we can consider this independently. We don't have to do the same rate increase on residential and CII. We can differentiate it. And if we have the guts to make that kind of decision tonight, I will vote in favor of it. But I would at least ask that we do a serious study on doing this and try to put this on the property tax bill. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Any other?
So maybe President Akbari and Director Sethi, if you'd find it helpful, maybe now would be an appropriate time to ask Mr. Gar kind of for his perspective on differentiating, kind of the approaches suggested between commercial and residential, and maybe what are some of the things we would need to consider or think about if we were to take that approach.
Hi, good to see everyone today. Thank you, John. Yeah, so the challenge is right now, the current approach that we're developing with the cost of service is that we're differentiating customer class by meter size, by looking at the capacity by meter size. And we don't have much. We did in the prior presentation when we presented to you, look at peaking by customer class, and we talked about how there isn't that much of a difference between residential and commercial. So we wouldn't recommend having different rate increases currently with the current model that we've developed for residential and commercial. So that would be a bit challenging right now at where we are.
So I think maybe I can step into the request, though. I think, that would, from what we're hearing from Sanjay, that sounds like it would be a pretty maybe comprehensive restart to our rates analysis process. And we would really be separating out completely different kind of rate setups between commercial and non-commercial customers. Am I kind of characterizing that?
Correct. I mean, you're exactly right. We would have to restart and look at it with a different lens. And it would take some time.
So I think, if that were the pleasure of the board, we could do that, or alternatively, it could be something that's more of a focal point in our next rates process. I also wanted to just touch real briefly on one kind of small bullet point that Mr. Alm covered as it relates to the ultrasonic meter replacements. Right now, only 4% of our customers have an ultrasonic meter. And it's going to take the next 2 to 2.5 years before everyone has that. So much of kind of the period that's going to be covered by this current process will be with many of our customers not having an ultrasonic meter. And then hopefully, for the next process, we would have much better data in terms of what we're actually experiencing in our service area.
Okay, thank you. John Weed, let me point out, I believe that we currently give a credit on the 1.5-inch residential meters because we didn't want to charge them for the service charge, or charge them because for a fire suppression capability that we hope they'll never use. So do we not already have built into our system a difference between commercial and residential for the same size meter?
So the way it works is we currently have one framework for meter charges with a different rate for each size. And then what we do is we do not count against against a residential customer the capacity they need for their residential fire sprinkler system. So they might have a 1-inch meter, but they're billed like a 3/4-inch meter because we don't charge them for the capacity for the fire sprinkler system.
I believe that achieves the same goal or the same result that Director Sethi was suggesting for difference between the residential and commercial. So a mechanism for accomplishing that. Thank you.
President Akbari, may I?
Yes.
So I have a clarification question for staff. Something Director Sethi said actually piqued my interest. I believe the reference is that Help on Tap will only apply to the fixed charge portion of our bill. Is that correct?
So when we apply the credit, we apply it to the account. We don't, it's, in terms of kind of a financial process, it's not specifically applied against the service charge. Although I know in a lot of the discussions we've had with the board, we have talked about the program in terms of, kind of how much of the service charge it covers, kind of in terms of those discussions.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it covers the entire bill. So it doesn't matter what's the percentage breakdown between fixed and commodity. It basically just a fixed amount taken off the entire bill. Okay, thank you.
Director Wong, I have the same understanding.
Okay.
I hope I wasn't misinterpreted, but I always think of it as applying to the service charge because we increased it so much, and then we set up Help on Tap to to try and, help people out on that portion of their bill that had gone up so sharply over a few years. Because we were down
No.
charging $8 to $10 on the fixed charge, and now we're up to 50. And we didn't have a help on tap program, and we did, and we effectively have enough revenue sources that we could cover the entire service charge.
Thank you, Director Seppi. I think that staff answered my question, which is help on tap will apply to entire bills. So it really doesn't matter how we break down fixed and commodity charge. And the second thing is, this is more a comment and a thought. Personally, if you look at, I think it's slide 24, it's very clear that if we put all the increase on fixed charge, our low-income residential customers will end up bearing a larger rate increase. Instead of 3% across the board, they'll end up with a 3.8% rate increase. This is, for me, that is just not fair. My personal preference is actually to be consistent with what the board has decided in terms of priority, is to go for 3% uniform rate increase equally in both commodity and fixed charges. I will tell you, it's very tempting to say that, to be fair to our low-income customers, is to have the increase all on the commodity side. But I can also see that the board's priority is different than my personal priority. So I could definitely go with a 3% uniform across the board. Thank you.
If I may respond here quickly, and it's not in the slide, but I brought it up in the last meeting or set of meetings, that I was suggesting a 6% increase on the service charge instead of this 8.8%, and a 6% increase results in a 2.6% overall increase, which is less than the 3% across the board. And we can live with a 2.6% rate increase.
And I am just going to say that we went through many different workshops, with all due respect, and I think you have some really creative ideas, Director Seppi, but with all due respect, we've been through many different financial workshops. This is the last in the long series, and the board as a whole came up with the 3% rate increase, and that's what we have to deal with, right?
Yeah, but I don't accept a 3.8% increase. If we have 6% on the service charge, 0% on the commodity, that results in a 2.6% rate increase. And the reason I have said that this is a better rate increase than 3% across the board is because this adds to our revenue stability and predictability.
And this is where I would respectfully disagree with you. Based on the presentation and previous slides, only about 10% of our revenue, 10 to 11%, is variable. So for me, that's not as high of a priority as to have a lower across the board rate increase for low-income residential customers. And that definitely is a personal opinion. And that's based on what's important to me, and also consistent with what I thought the board has decided on. So thank you.
John Weed, I think we can agree that historically the commercial customers have been subsidizing the residential customers. The question is how much that subsidies be. Bringing things into balance is so much better in financial planning. Last time we went through a rate increase, we were told the increase was needed, and we have the information available to us this time, that 5% of the rate increase was going to be applied to variable expenses, and 95% was going to be charged as service charge. And yet we still maintain the reverse ratio. We're going in the wrong direction. This time it's 28% of the rate increase they're saying is going to be needed to cover water cost and our variable cost. And yet we're still maintaining, according to this proposal, if we were to adopt it, 2/3 of the increase will be on something that's only 28% of our actual cost. Again, we continue going in the wrong direction. Another element was noted here. It was actually 11% variable. If it is in truth 11% variable is the cost difference, the non-unreliable that we're looking at, why are we looking at a 60% surcharge to cover the shortfall in revenue? Something's not computing. So, thank you.
I think it's important for the record to show that one class of our customer is not subsidizing the other class. I think we have enough rate studies and cost of service study to back it up.
Yeah, and that Director Wong, to that point, Raf Tallis presented specific to that question at last month's workshop, and what they found is if we broke out commercial or residential and non-residential as two separate classes, the rate would be less than a penny different.
Thank you.
Director Gunther, I think I actually wouldn't have an issue with a 6% on the service charge. I have some difficulty with the 8.8% on the service charge. I think that was because if we put all of the 6%, and I can't remember how this worked out, because I'm okay with raising the service charge a little more. I disagree that it's way out of whack. I think we're right about where we need to be with the service charge. Perhaps we can go up a little bit more. I think we're fine. If you look at the charts, the variable portion isn't that great. It can be done with stage rates, which is fine by me. I think if we were at 6% on the service charge, we could recover that with the help on tap modifications. If we did a 6% on the service charge, and I know that's not on the chart, so I'm trying to figure out how that ended up. 8%. I remember it was something that had to do, and I understand it did. If I had to choose, with those numbers, I don't care for the 8%. Although reality is we didn't do anything last year. So it's not really 8%, it's less. We didn't do anything last year. I agree that we're probably going to see an increase with ultrasonic meters. We might see a smaller decrease if people see they have leaks and they start cleaning their leaks up in their small ones. I think that data is still not here. The meter's going to read better. Hopefully it'll get some attention to smaller leaks. So at the moment, I wish I knew where I was sitting on this. I understand Director Sethi's comments, and I'm not certain we're going to see a 3% increase because we're not going to have all the meters in yet. But I also understand that could result in a higher increase. This is a 2-year period, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm concerned. I don't, like I said, I was okay with the 6% on the service charge, but it came out to 8%. And I'm going to ask staff, is there a way to get that to a 6% with some minor increase to commodity?
Yeah, so I think the question becomes, what's the overall revenue increase we're trying to get? So for example, if we increase the service charge 6%, that would increase the standard residential customer's bill about 2.6%. And I think it would provide for approximately a 2% overall revenue increase. And so if you still wanted to get the 3% overall revenue increase with that limit on a service charge increase, then the difference would have to be made up on the commodity side. And so you would have a lesser increase on the commodity side. And so, obviously we've put forward a few different approaches for discussion today. And, whatever, kind of board feedback we get, we can go back and prepare, that as kind of a final proposal for the board to consider in December. So,
I would personally, I would like to see a number where it was a 6 plus something versus 0. Whatever that number comes out to. Off the top of your head, John, I'm not going to hold you to these numbers. Any concept of where that number might actually fall? 1, 2?
Yeah, it's going to be about a 1.5. So if you wanted to get a 3% overall increase in revenue, right, and you wanted a 6% increase in service charge revenue,
right,
and keep in mind that a 6% increase in service charge revenue does not mean that the rate for each meter size will go up exactly 6%. Please keep that in mind too, because just because of kind of all the details behind how that's calculated.
Sure.
But if you said a 6% increase in service charge revenue, then what you would need is about a 1.5% commodity increase to get to an overall revenue increase of 3%.
About 1.5. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And one thing I would like to have the board consider is that here's the perspective that I'm looking at. With all due respect to Mr. Wunderlich, the finance staff, they do a fantastic job of forecasting out our revenue needs. But when I look at our timetable moving forward, I believe we can live with a 2% overall rate increase, which is why I argue for 6% on the service charge, 0% on the commodity, because frankly, I anticipate that we're going to get that commodity rate increase through the implementation of AMI. And it goes well into the future. The ultrasound meters do not degrade over time like the positive displacement meters. So it carries well into the future, whatever that percentage increases in recorded water consumption. That's just the perspective that I'm looking at this. And I believe at 6% on the service charge, 0 on the commodity, overall close to 2%, we can live with that.
Yeah, so, because we do look at our rates pretty frequently, I wouldn't come in and say that we can't live with that. It does mean that we may have to make that up in the future, depending on what actually happens with our metering performance. And so that's why, kind of getting back to the same point that so far only 4% of our customers have an ultrasonic meter. And it's going to be several years before they all have that meter and we really know what's going to happen. So kind of from that perspective, as staff, kind of what we were thinking is, maybe the next cycle, once we actually have the data, is the time to kind of do the more comprehensive, kind of reevaluation of how these things break out.
Well, let me see if I can go around the board table here and build on what Director Gunther is saying. If we had a 6% plus a 1.5%, which of the other board members could support that? Because I could go with that.
I could live with 6 and 1.
6 and 1. I could go with that.
That's actually interesting because I was going to come with a similar proposal that I mentioned to Mr. Stevenson, suggesting 4 to 5% on the service charge and 1 to 2% on the commodity side. I could potentially get behind 6% on service and 1% on commodity. I would prefer I would actually be a little more comfortable with 6% on service and 0% on commodity if that were an option, but I can get behind a 6-and-1 split. It's not too far off of where
I would like to caveat that 6% that we investigate the concept of increasing the help on tap to cover as much of that for our low income that we can.
Exactly.
I can't go with it.
Okay.
Counting all the rate increases on fixed charges will still unfairly punish our lower income customers. No, I did not say lowest income, because it's, even if we increase the help on tap criteria, we still have seniors who do not qualify and they do live on a fixed income. And trying to increase a portion of a water bill where they have absolutely no control over, it is not going to work for me. But I know I'm in the minority.
Okay.
John, can you support 6-0 or 6-1? What's your preference?
My preference is 6-0, but the 6-1 would at least allow us to maintain the status quo. I would suggest that the fact that we have a 60% surcharge proposed for our rate shows that we're not in the right place. If you want to hit somebody who in their financial planning, hit them with a 60% surcharge. That is a disservice to the low income people. It's a terrible service.
I disagree with Director Weed's analogy. I understand how he draws it, but I've sat and listened to this and watched it for a long time, and I almost don't want to watch it anymore, because the more I think about it and the more I kind of run this through my head, I see our service charge going down, because regardless if you have a commodity, your commodity, there is a portion of that service charge that needs to be attached to that. So I don't want to, I'm just saying, I don't agree with the analogy that we're off that much. In fact, I think we're right where we need to be. And I think that shows when one looks at the chart as to what the real variable is based on the drought, which is about 10%. I could live with 6-0. I think if we have a serious drop, I'd like to see stage rates included in our rate increase based on the concept of, hey, you're going to use a lot of water. Well, it's going to cost us more to provide it. And that would help alleviate some of that miss, I think, on the 2% if we go into that situation next year. I'm curious what staff would have to say about that.
Mr. Stevenson and Mr. Wunderlich, I just want to make it clear. I think I'm counting 4 votes for 6-0.
So I'm definitely hearing 4 votes for a 6% revenue increase to the service charge. I'm a little less clear on where the support is for whether there's also an increase at some small level on the commodity side.
I would prefer 6-0. So my preference would be there.
I would just like to know if we did that, or how the gravity, the impact. Are we talking about the concept with a staged rate? If we included staged rates, would we be able to, make that up if we had to? I think we could live with it. Based on some of the stuff we've been doing. However, I think we need to have stage rates attached to that concept.
If you look at our budget, 1% is maybe $1 million. That's easy to make up.
Yeah, so if I could respond to the stage rate question, we are planning on having stage rates as part of the overall rate structure. They're only actually implemented if we're in a declared water shortage emergency. So it's not something we could just decide to implement because revenue is low. It would only be because we're in a declared water shortage emergency, and they're designed to maintain, essentially to maintain our revenue despite lower water sales. And so it would not in any way make up for, say, not applying a rate increase to the commodity charge.
So I do have a question for staff. I know I'm in the minority, but I do need some clarification questions. Some clarification. So we as the board decided that we need a 3% rate increase. With the only 6% service charge increase, that means that equates about 2% overall increase. So I have heard staff saying we might need to adjust, and I have heard director says we can live with a 2% rate increase. I thought we have agreed we need about 3% rate increase. So with that assumption, if we started out with a 2% rate increase for this 2-year budget cycle, does that mean the next cycle would have to be guaranteed greater than the 3% that we are projecting? So basically, are we just kicking the can down the road?
Yeah, so, as Director Sethi points out, it's about 1.2 million, losing 1% worth of rate increase. Not a significant amount in a single year, but that 1.2 million lower revenue continues indefinitely, and it does add up over time. So what I would suggest, if the board did want to approach it this way in the first year of applying the rate increase, is that in the second year, instead of applying a 3% across the board increase, that we would apply a 4% across the board increase. So year one would be 6% revenue increase on the service charge only, which is about a 2% overall revenue increase. And then in year two, instead of a 3% across the board, it would be 4% across the board, so that you still get to the same overall revenue at the end of the second year.
My question on that, John, and forgive me, is does that mean the rating that the service charge is going to go up 4% on the second year as well?
So
additional 4%?
Yeah, so year one would, based on the feedback we're getting, it's a 6% increase to the service charge, 0% increase in the commodity charge. Staff will work with Raftalis to make sure the cost of service study reflects those allocations. In year two, you would have to apply any increases uniformly unless you wanted to redo your cost of service study.
Why can't we go with 6-0 for both years?
Well, I'll ask Mr. Gar to answer that question and what that might mean in terms of preparing the cost of service study.
So whenever we, the metaphor I like to give is that the cost of service is the realignment of the rate, and the rate increase is just a percent increase on across board. We want to do different rate increases on either the fixed or the commodity. We would need to have a cost of service that justifies that logic and rationality, which translates into basically another cost of service each study. So if we want to increase the fixed charge again, we would have to redo the cost of service again.
And I think, Mr. Gar, you can help us out. Would that mean a fresh Proposition 218 process because the rates are now based on a new study?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, that's a good point. I didn't even think about the implication that, because now we're doing another one. So you would want to do, you wouldn't want to have two administrative records with one Prop 218 notice. That I think it gets a little bit confusing.
Well, I'm incredibly confused about this. If we have a cost of service study, we're now trying to determine a rate that we're going to apply. We have the surcharges, which are still going to be in place in case we miss the mark, which if we go into a drought and come out of it, we probably will. But we're merely applying some numbers. Now, unfortunately, I would support the fixed charge for both years going up at that rate. That's an allocation. It puts us in the right direction. If I'm thinking of it structurally, and I'm trying to restructure our rates so that we don't have to play this game with extraordinary surcharges as the commodity and conservation kicks in, has nothing to do with rates, it's just social media. The cost of service remains the same. How we bill it is the question here, and we're talking about changing the billing, not changing our cost of service. How do we pay for it? And right now we're out of whack. We'll be a little less out of whack if we put the entire rate increase on the service charge. And if we don't, and the last 4 years, we've done, since the last drought, we've done very well. We were putting $4 million a month in the bank.
So maybe
we're leveraged to do very well when we sell more water. We're leveraged to do very poorly and go into the hole and need surcharges when we don't sell as much water.
Mr. Gar, you did your cost of service, which supports a 3% annual rate increase over 2 years. I was suggesting 6060, which amounts to a 2% rate increase, which is below the threshold that you have set for us. So I don't see how we violate or have to redo a cost of service study. You've given us those numbers, and I'm saying we can live with 2% each year overall rate increase instead of 3.3.
Yeah, sorry about the confusion. Let me maybe try this again. So the cost of service, think of the cost of service as the proportionality of how much we're collecting on the meters, on the commodity, and by meter size. So think of that, we have like we almost have 2 major buckets, and then one bucket has sub buckets, which is meter size. So how much we're collecting on the commodity side, how much we're collecting on the fixed charge, and within the fixed is by meter size. That proportionality is cost of service. The financial plan is then increasing all of those 3 buckets by the same percentage. If the board would like to increase one bucket more than the other, then we need to have an administrative record or a cost of service that explains the math behind that and a justification. Unfortunately, because of all these court cases that have occurred in the last 5 or 10 years, we're have a standard of care that we need to follow through so that we develop this administrative record. And that's what we're doing. So that's the the hiccup here, is that we have to have this administrator. I would recommend having an administrative record. In theory, you don't have to have one, but it's best practice to have one. And so that's the challenge here. So if you want to increase one bucket more than another, then we need a cost of service.
And we have plenty of time to get that done right now, don't we?
Yes.
Well, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we have plenty of time to get it done in advance of the December meeting. That's why we're very hopeful as staff that this is our final workshop, so we can get the direction, prepare that administrative record for the board to support a decision that's made in December to issue a Proposition 218 notice. Mm-hmm. But I think what Mr. Gar is saying is that if in year 2, you don't want to apply a uniform increase, and instead you want to focus the increase in a way that changes the proportionality between fixed and variable charges, then that's a new cost of service study, and then a new Proposition 218 notice and protest process. Mm-hmm. And we're not saying that we can't do that. We just want to make sure the board understands the implications of this approach.
Mm-hmm. President Akbari, could I suggest, we're 2 hours into the meeting, a short break? I think we could all use a breather.
Yeah, why don't we take about 10 minutes and we'll return at 6:15.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep, I think we can.
Okay, great. It's 6:16 p.m. We're reconvening. Let me first open it up to members of the public who have any questions or comments on this item. You can do so by raising your hand in the Zoom app or indicating through the chat. I believe I saw Mr. Kenan first. Mr. Kenan.
Thank you, President Akbari. The optimal allocation of charges between a fixed service charge and a variable consumption charge is not straightforward. Utilities must balance the cost of infrastructure, and in the case of a water utility, the cost of delivering the first drop versus the cost to provide incremental water to a customer. Many years ago, when ACWD had a much lower proportion of the bill as a fixed charge, I made comments to the board to increase the fraction to more accurately reflect the operations of the district. I recall that the board back then viewed my comments with a jaundiced eye. How things have changed. With the doubling of the service charge a few years ago, along with other adjustments, I feel that ACWD's allocation of charges between the fixed and variable components is about right. Looking at our benchmark agencies, ACWD's fixed charges is right at the median in absolute dollars and slightly higher than median as a fraction of total charges. These facts further validate my assumption. Note that not all utilities with significant fixed infrastructure costs rely on a split roll. Most energy utilities, including PG&E, charge residential customers strictly based on consumption, albeit with a minimum monthly charge. Setting aside issues related to local generation, they can do this because even though a significant amount of their expenditures are related to their fixed plant, their customers will, on average, consume a predictable amount of energy. Electricity and natural gas, if one utilizes natural gas-powered appliances, are essential to modern life, and setting aside the occasional off-grid zealot, everyone will purchase an amount of energy commensurate with modern living, even when they're asked to conserve or rates are increased. Water, like electricity, is an essential service, and despite calls for conservation, ACWD's customers are not going to stop consuming water. There is a floor. Based on the current response to the calls for conservation, many customers have hit that floor. Thus, collecting some of the fixed infrastructure costs through consumption charges is sensible. Placing the entirety of the fixed costs as a service charge is not reasonable. Infrastructure costs are not independent of consumption. If we knew that every customer would only consume 10 gallons a day, the district could optimize the plant and reduce expenditures accordingly. However, we know that customers use much more than 10 gallons a day, and thus, the infrastructure must be sized to support that consumption. The cost associated with that larger infrastructure is arguably consumption-based, and thus should be allocated as a consumption-related charge. In summary, there are consumption-related infrastructure costs which should logically be tied with consumption and not as fixed charges. The proposal to allocate all of the 3% rate increase to the fixed charge would disproportionately impact the small consumer who are more likely to be in a lower socioeconomic class. Thus, I am supportive of the status quo in the proportion of the water bill being allocated to a fixed charge, with the 3% increase being allocated uniformly across both fixed and variable components. Now, to Director Sethi's point, if the district can live with the revenue increase commensurate with a 6% fixed charge increase and a 0% commodity charge increase, which Mr. Wunderlich states is a 2% revenue increase, it calls into question the validity of the cost of service analysis at hand. What then is the true cost of service? It sounds like the cost of service analysis is a numerical exercise to justify some arbitrary number not grounded in reality. Regardless, placing a higher fraction of the rate increase on the fixed charge disproportionately impacts smaller volume, lower income customers. That is math. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Kelly A., you have the floor.
Okay. That spike in natural gas bills 20 years ago was driven by an Enron monopoly that throttled down gained control over the physical transmission of natural gas over interstate lines through large pipelines. And those people were not screaming about meter changes. They were screaming about price hikes rigged by market manipulation and natural gas suffocation. Now, the statistic says you don't have to eat the whole ox to know that the meat is tough. And if you put out 3% of new meters, that means you already have a couple thousand new meters already out there in the ground or on at the customer sites that could be sampled starting tomorrow. And you could find out what those meters are doing to the volumetric usage compared to whatever it was before. And the distribution of residential customers is multiple. You could is bimodal, or somehow there's a variation in these people. Some people own a nice single family residential house. Other people live in huts. A couple of people are homeless. So you could look at the apartment dwellers versus the single family homes and do a rate comparison for the two different income levels from that demographic map that you were showing earlier today. By just calling it one kind of residential customer, you're looking at people that have a lot of outdoor water use, which may no longer be represent a lot of your customers on the residential side. Now, revenue stability that we're worshiping today, it ought not be the main goal. And revenue floor is required to maintain operations during wet years, but during drought years, revenues have to be unstable. Rates must be increased drastically to drive conservation. I'm the only one who believes in rate-based conservation, but I'll go to my grave preaching my gospel. My bias is that I worship at the altar of market pricing to balance supply and demand. Rates ought to be in line with market prices. And by the way, $800 an acre foot as of today. The main goal right now ought to be revenue stability and well, is it going to be revenue stability and predictability, or is it going to be complying with conservation mandates? I heard there was going to be conservation mandates in about 6 weeks. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Depends how much rain we get. We don't know the future. But inaction and complacency are caused by the lack of any urgent conservation requirement right now in the minds of district management and this board. The board should be planning for drought mandates right now, not fine-tuning the last 3% of its revenue, cost-based revenue model that is like arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. As the previous caller just mentioned, the cost models are all bogus, and I have no faith in them. I have great faith in market-based pricing. Most of the Bay Area and Tri-Valley were conserving around 5 or 10% as of earlier this month, and the baseline, it's falling somewhat short of the mandatory 15% conservation. And if there's a floor, how is it that Marin, as of October 14th, was conserving 24%? Is their floor different than our floor? Do they have like, special toilets or, highly motivated people? I don't know what they're doing, but I'm telling you, if you get on people and force them to conserve, you can get 24% conservation. I'm not sure we need to do that, but the Marin, they need to do that. And then finally, the highly efficient households that are complaining about when they're ordered to cut use, the drought surcharges automatically are going to give them a break, and they're going to penalize the big users, the wasteful users. The only way to cut urban use drastically, which 15% seems a little bit drastic right now, is going to either be draconian orders to cut use with security guards and German shepherds, or sky-high drought surcharges. And I'll go with the drought surcharges because that'll also help you to balance your budget. And it's a lot more market-based and a lot more efficient. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment or ask a question at this time? I'm not seeing any hands raised in the Zoom app, and I'm also not seeing anything in the chat. So I will bring it back to the board to see if there's any additional questions or comments before we move it back to staff. I think Director Huang.
Yeah. So I guess I have a couple questions, a question and a couple comments, I guess. So first of all, it sounded like that potentially we could live with a 2% rate increase and offset the loss of the 1% income through expected increase or in income from installing the new AMI meters. If that understanding is right, then I would just like to say that, well, that income can only be realized after we put the meter in the ground, and we don't have that many in the ground yet. So it's kind of like counting chickens before they hatch. Need to install, have it run, and in order to get that additional funding coming in. Second point is, if it's true that we could live with 2% rate increase, then we should just have 2% rate increase, forget about this 3% across the board, equally in fixed and commodity charges. So 2% and 2%. If that is actually true, we could live with that. Then that should be what we charge instead of 3%, because obviously we only charge what we need. Thirdly, 6% annual increase in fixed charge for 2 years in a row will equal about, if my math is right, and somebody check it, John, you probably want to check it, would equal about a 12.4% rate increase, somewhat fixed charge increase overall for 2 years. When you do a 6% on top of 6%, that is quite a bit of increase on fixed charges. And if you look at slide 11, if you compare the fixed charges, that would put us in great company with private for-profit companies. We will be in great company with Cal Water, who actually makes a profit from selling the water. That is not our mission, and that is not where we are supposed to be. We're supposed to serve our customers. Our rates are supposed to be affordable. By putting in all the increases on fixed charges, we are penalizing our small water users and and that's where majority of our low-income families stays. It just doesn't make sense to me. So the request is, if truly we could deal with just a 2% increase, then my recommendation is 2% across the board. Forget the 3% we've been talking about.
Yes, so if I could maybe respond to a couple of those things. First off, I can confirm your math. If we did 2 successive 6% increases on the fixed charge, that would, with the compounding, that would be 12.4% over the 2 years. In terms of whether or not we could live with 2%, you know, kind of the perspective on that is, if we did a 2% increase or overall revenue increase for this year, you know, that's not going to put us in the red in the next 12 months. But when you look at our long-term trajectory, eventually within the next few years, we'll have to make that up. And so what we've modeled is annual 3% rate increases essentially indefinitely. And so if we do less than 3%, then that will have to be made up in a subsequent rate increase with a higher rate increase.
Okay, so basically pay now or pay later, but you have to pay either way.
Correct.
Okay.
And there is, you know, of course, you do lose the money temporarily by delaying doing the increase. So that temporary loss has to be made up in the future as well.
Okay, but just theoretically, if we do a 2%, what project do we need to push back any projects? Would anything suffer?
We would spend down our reserves faster. We
Okay.
currently have reserves above the policy target. They are anticipated, even with 3% annual rate increases, to be spent down to essentially the board target within about 5 years. So if we did lower rate increases, we would have larger annual deficits and would spend down those reserves faster.
So in a sense, we could borrow money from the reserves, but once again, we need to pay it back.
Yeah. And so eventually, because once the available reserves are spent down, we will have to balance annual revenues with expenditures. Okay. It does mean a larger increase in the future.
So we're basically back to 3%. If not, we have to have a higher rate increase than anticipated or expected.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and then in terms of the additional revenue from changing out ultrasonic, the positive displacement meters with ultrasonic meters, the most kind of reliable study that the engineering team reviewed as part of the AMI project, which supported the change order that the board approved a little over a year ago to go with ultrasonic meters in the project. It showed anywhere from a 1.4% reduction to a 3% increase as a result of going from positive displacement to ultrasonic. Now, we also know, though, that some of these meters that are being replaced are old positive displacement meters. So it's not just the transition from positive displacement to ultrasonic, it's also the fact that you're replacing, in some instances, older positive displacement meters. And so that's why, even though the study shows the transition anywhere from a 1.4% reduction in meter consumption up to a 3% increase, we've assumed the very top end of those study results and an overall 3% increase in metered consumption in the financial plan. But in reality, those are estimates. It could be more, it could be less. But our recommendation as staff would be to not change that estimate. There's just a lot of uncertainty. We're only about 2 to 2.5 years away from having the meters replaced and then actually knowing the results. And I'm sure at that point in time, I'll be coming to you and telling you how wrong I was with that estimate. But for now, we think it's a prudent and reasonable estimate, and we should wait until we get the actual data to change that.
Okay, thank you. So basically what you're saying is homeowner like me, who has a fairly new meter that was just swapped out maybe a couple of years ago because of a leak, I won't see that big of a change in my water consumption even with a new AMI meter, because my meter is still fairly new and should, in theory, still be fairly accurate.
Correct.
Right.
But if you're a customer, you know, I'm going to use myself as an example. I don't live in the district service area, but I'm pretty sure I still have the original meter that was installed at my home when it was built 23 years ago. If Cal Water replaces my meter, especially if they replace it with an ultrasonic meter, I might see like a 15% increase in my bill because I have an old positive displacement meter.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is there's still a lot of uncertainty because there are a lot of variability for you to actually have a confidence in predicting any sort of cost saving. So you rather we wait until we have the actual data. Is that what I'm hearing?
Before changing the 3% assumption, yes, I would prefer to wait until we have the actual data. And we're only, you know, 2.5 years away from having that. So I don't think there's an urgent need, you know, to make a change.
Okay. No, I'm convinced I'm still at 3% uniform across fixed and variable. And I really do not, I want to be fair to our customers, make our water affordable for our smaller water user and low income customers. And I really don't want to be in a company of Cal Water or any for-profit water companies. Thank you.
If I can offer a little bit of perspective here. If we go forward with a new Prop 218 rate increase, that only goes into effect March 1 of next year. Here we are and about to enter November. So the 2.5 years that we're talking about for the replacement of most of our customer base, at least somewhere around 68,000 meters being replaced, is going to happen during this new rate environment that covers 2 years, from March of next year through 2 years later. And so I'm only offering my viewpoint based on everything that I've read, and I'm not trying to indict our engineering team or finance department. It's just my personal outlook that if we give up 1%, about $1.2 million each of these 2 years, with an effective 2% rate increase each year, that we will more than make it up with the implementation of AMI. And that's just my personal outlook. And I want to be responsible to the community that elected me to this board. And so I would rather be cautious right now about the impact of AMI. And like I said before, I don't want the community to see perhaps 3 different rate increases compounding on top of each other. And so people have a chance to reduce their water consumption on the consumption side if they want to reduce their water bill. But I'm in agreement with Director Weed that, and even Director Gunther, that a little bit of a rate increase on the service charge relative to the commodity side is, one, I think it's healthy for the district. Number 2, a proportionate difference between the service and the commodity charge will not change all that much. It might change 2%, the split between the two over the next 2 year rate increase. So it's not like what we did in the past where we increased the service charge considerably. Thank you.
I have a question for staff. If we did a 6% increase on the service charge, average service charge, I'm trying to think where mine is. Can you tell me what the 3/4 inch meter service charge?
Yeah, that's $56.61.
Okay.
So if we did a 6% increase on that, that would be a $3.40 increase in the service charge.
Every 2 months.
Yes.
Yeah. I understand, you know, I certainly understand Director Wong, and I've always felt this way too. And and to be taking the position of a 6 and 1. I know that doesn't seem to be we're in the same boat here, but I'm looking at the numbers and I know that I could afford this. I know there is a small group in the district that may have difficulty with that. I think we're losing sight of really where the numbers are, which is we're looking at about $2 a month. I'm not a, and I also earlier said, I'm not a big advocate of changing the service charge much higher, but then again, the percentages too are going to be like 2%. So I don't like 8% or 8.8. I could live with a 6.1. I don't know how staff feels about a 6.1. We don't even have to implement the 1 next year if we don't want to. I would have preferred maybe a 5.2 or something like that, but I don't, we're starting to throw numbers out there. We got to get to an end somewhere. And the numbers, the difference between a 5.2 and a 6.1, I don't even know if they're worth arguing over. The actual amount we're looking at for an increasing of a bill per month is approximately $3. Correct?
So
Or it's every 2 months or 1 month. The 6%. I didn't take my calculator out. I should be able to do this math in my head, but my brain's frozen. How much was that again, John?
$3.40
Per bill or per month?
per bill.
Per bill. So we're looking at like $1.50 per month?
About $1.70 per month. Yes.
Okay.
For a typical residential customer,
Typical residential
3/4 inch meter.
Okay.
And again, my kind of understanding of the direction is it would be a 6% revenue increase. We would need to go back and calculate what that means exactly for each meter size. So take this as an estimate. Because of the way the meter charge is calculated, a 6% revenue increase is not exactly a 6% increase in each service charge.
Yeah. Do you think it would go up or go down? Just I'm just throwing it out there. You don't. I wouldn't hold you to this again. Or you don't want to answer that.
I think it's slightly. I think the percentage increase for smaller meters would be slightly less than it would be for larger meters, and the reason for that is there are 2 components essentially to the meter charge. Sanjay would say there are 3 components, but essentially there's a fixed part of the meter charge to cover the cost of customer service activities. Those activities do not vary based on meter size. And so those are a fixed cost. It's about $6 per bill, no matter how big your meter is. Then there are a couple of additional components to the meter charge that are based on the capacity of the meter. So they do depend on the meter size. And so, I'm kind of getting into very much the weeds of these calculations now, but essentially that fixed amount is a bigger part of the bill for smaller meters. And that part doesn't change. So the 6% revenue increase is only on the other part that's proportional to the meter size. So that's why I think the increase would be a little lower than 6% for the typical residential customer. Okay. And then the increase to the service charge would be a little bigger than 6% for the larger meters.
Okay. All right. What do you think a 6.1 is going to do versus a 6.1.5? How much do you, once again, I'm not holding you to these numbers.
Yeah. So if it was 6 and 1.5 gets us the overall 3% revenue increase. All right. Which is, kind of what staff is suggesting as far as maintaining consistent revenue increases year over year. 6.1 would be about 2.7% revenue increase.
Okay. I think we could live with a 6.1. I know Director Wong's not going to like that. I'm sorry, Judy. I think we're going to see an increase with ultrasonic, we may end up seeing a smaller decrease as leaks are found. I think there's more leaks out there than we realize.
Yeah, and again, our recommendation from staff, and we had a little opportunity to huddle also during the break we just had, is if the year 2 increase is not uniform, meaning it's not applied consistently to the commodity and service charge, it would be our recommendation to only do a 1-year increase in this notice and then come back and do a new notice next year.
What do you mean by that? If we did a 6-1?
So if you wanted to do a 6% increase to the service charge and 1% on the commodity side, and you wanted to do that 6 and 1 in both year 1 and again replicate that in year 2, that affects your, as Mr. Gar was explaining earlier, that affects your cost allocations in your study, and that requires a new study, and therefore we would suggest also a new Prop 218 process.
Oh, painful.
All right, so if you want that year 2 increase to not be uniform, then I think we're really talking about a 1-year proposal, and then we would come back again next year.
Yeah, and I would say, I would just offer an alternative. If the board's interested in it, it sounds like the board is interested in trying to move a little bit of the revenue increase to the fixed side. Another alternative is to go ahead with the 6% on the service charge and 1% on the commodity side for year 1, and then apply a uniform rate increase on year 2, because that can be done with the 1 cost of service study. Actually, I'll double check with Mr. Wunderlich to confirm that, but I believe that's the case.
That's correct. So the issue is the cost of service study we prepare will be in accordance with the year 1 proposal. And so as long as anything after year 1 is uniform, a new study is not required.
Right, but if you do want an uneven allocation between fixed and commodity in year 2, then that does require another separate cost of service analysis and a separate 218 process.
So, but we can complete that cost of service analysis before this December, which would allow us to put in effect a 2-year rate increase. And remember, the 218 notice is notifying customers that this is the maximum that their bill would go up on the fixed and commodity side.
So,
but actually, what I'd ask is for Mr. Wunderlich just to check that assumption. That
I mean, I guess I would ask Mr. Gar kind of his perspective on preparing 2 studies at the same time.
Yeah, I was. My recommendation is that we just have 1 study that supports 1 cost of service and associated with 1 Prop 218 notice. And then if we want to change it, then we do another study with a new Prop 218 notice. We're going a little bit into uncharted territory. And I'm a bit concerned about having 2 studies that not necessarily say slightly different things that could be used against each other.
Well, how much board support is there for a 6-0 for 1 year? Can we take a poll on that?
1 vote right here.
So I'm the second vote.
I'm the third. I do have a comment when I have an opportunity.
Jim, can you support 6-0 for 1 year?
I'd prefer 6-1-3-3.
Well, we got 3 votes right now for 6-0.
Okay.
What would happen if we went? No, never mind. I'm thinking 6-0-3-3.
No, 6-0 is, let's get us back on cycle. Let me encourage us to try and get back on cycle and in cadence where we do not have rate increases in election years. And we have discussed rates after the election. We don't politicize it like we did in the last election and campaign. So that would mean ideally a 3-year 218. But if we're going to do 1 year and then 2 years later, at least it gets us back into a better cycle.
I need to leave the room for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Director Weed, that's an interesting concept that I didn't think about. I'm not particularly, I know I'm the guy that put us here, but I'm not particularly fond of being in a situation like that where we're doing the rate cycle during the election years. I think it does impact the election in ways it shouldn't. It opens up doors for people to point to that. Now, I don't know how much, I know, I'm sure staff would just love to do another 218 notice next year.
Or we could do 3 years. We unfortunately did rates committee hearings before the election, which was totally unnecessary last time around.
In which case, I might go for a 1 year, puts us back on cycle.
So if I might kind of offer this thought, I wasn't sure if this would come up, but we have talked a lot this evening about the use of ultrasonic meters. Based on the timing of those meter replacements, a 3-year notice would mean that when we're starting our next process, we will have just completed those replacements and we'll have the full data to support discussions.
Okay. Another point on that. We could have that data, usable data, because the data under our current plan, it'll still be maybe, what if, and suspect. Some of the meters you're putting in, put them in tandem with the existing meters. Go to your district headquarters and do the same. Go to the board of directors and put in dual meters at the senior staff and board of directors. Then you'll have a real reading on what the difference is. And we have $80 million a year that we bill in commodity charges. We're going to do, the better part of that is going to be going to ultrasonic. So now we're down to maybe $40 million, $50 million a year in revenues. For that, we can have that information in a few weeks by merely installing some meters in tandem, getting the read and looking at what the difference is. It's not that hard. And it's certainly justified given the amount of money we're talking about in this billing process. Next, we are so far out of whack that I would support doubling the service charge and cutting the commodity charge in half. Then you have a rational and professional business practice. We're an enterprise district. We should start acting like an enterprise district and not putting our primary focus on social welfare. You address the social welfare on a per customer basis. You don't warp your entire structure to try and help a few people in the organization, and everything gets turned on its head. This has been crazy, and it's been crazy for some time. Thank you.
If I may, we brought out, now that we're talking about perhaps doing a 3-year Prop 218 cycle, I have a lot of problem with that. I think I was finally convinced by staff and the other directors to go with a 2-year 218 cycle because we have a 2-year budget. Now we're literally saying we want a 3-year 218 cycle. So our customer could only protest our rate once every 3 years now.
We're in the second year of a 2-year budget. We do another 2-year budget next year. So we went out of cycle last year by not having a rate increase.
Hold on, Director Wheat. If what you're saying, that's fine. If we're only going to do a 1-year 218 and a 2-year 218, I can understand that. That is perfectly fine. But if we are talking about just go out and do a 3-year 218 just to sync up, I will have problem with that. Just based on availability to our customers, responsibility and accountability to our customers, I will have problem with that. But I am fine with doing a 1-year 218 and a 2-year 218. That's on the process. Of course, I still have my issues with allocation of the rate increase and the amount, but that's besides the point. I know I'm in the minority, so that's it.
Well, Director Wong, I concur with you. If we we did get out of sync with our budget cycles, like Director Weed is pointing out. So if we did a 1 year 6-0 and we come back, we'll have much more information on AMI a year from now. We'll be about halfway through our implementation. And then we can fold back into sync with our 2-year budget cycle with a proper 218 notice with a lot more information at hand too.
So the question for staff is, how much is a 218 process going to cost us?
That doesn't cost that much. You know, the
Okay.
only real cost is sending out the notice, right? That's the only real kind of marginal cost. And I think, you know, I would guess that probably costs somewhere on the order of like $60,000. So, you know, it's not free, but it's not like a huge cost.
Well, but there's still a bunch of workshops to support them. I assume you guys will have financial workshop to lead out to the 218. There's staffing costs, there's cost to the directors, there's cost to consultants, correct?
Yeah, so I guess it would depend on what exactly we were doing in that process. I certainly don't get paid anymore if we have a lot of workshops. And board member per diems are pretty minor, so I think that's not a big impact. So yeah, I think we could probably spend up to an extra 40,000 on consultants as well, depending on what kind of change we were making, right? If we're just doing a uniform rate increase, and so it's not a new cost of service study, then we would spend less. So 40,000 is maybe more of a more expensive side, perhaps. So yeah, I would probably guess we spend about $100,000 all told to go through a process.
And on top of that, we'll be asking you to do more work with the same amount of time. But yeah, it doesn't cost us any in terms of financially, but I think in time, I would assume staff would have to squeeze more work in, and that's something that you guys have to work out. But 100K, okay.
Mr. Stevenson, we're now entering our 3rd hour. I think we've got 3, if not 4 votes for a 6-0 for 1 year. What else does staff need from the board right now?
I think I've heard at least 3 votes for 6-0, but what we don't have right now, or at least what I don't have, is confirmation as to what you want to have in the 218 notice, because that's what we're going to bring back to the board in December. So do you want to include a 2nd year? I've heard some discussion about a 2nd and a 3rd year. And I think those are the key things we need to know. And then if so, then what's in that 2nd year in it? And if it's not uniform, then it really, it's not going to be something we'll be able to do without a separate analysis. So I think, Mr. Wunderlich, I'll ask you to add to that, but that's what I think is missing right now in terms of direction to staff.
Well, I think what I was saying is we have the votes for 6-0 for 1 year.
Correct. Yes. So I think what we need to know is, are we preparing a 1-year notice based on 6-0, or are we preparing a 2-year notice that also includes a uniform increase in year 2?
1 year. 1 year.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the 1-year notice and then come back to the 2-year cycle.
Yeah. So if I could ask Marion to go back 1 slide. So then I think we've got clear direction from the board majority for a 6%. Now I'm going to describe it as a 6% revenue increase to fixed charges. So that's, again, it will not be exactly 6% for each meter size, but we will bring that table to the December board meeting. So you will see exactly what it is by meter size. And so we will prepare that as a 1-year notice and seeking board authorization to issue that notice at the December meeting. And 218 notices would, our target date would be for those to be sent out before Christmas, to make sure they're sent out at least 45 days before the regular February meeting, February 10th, 2022. So that's what we're looking at. Do I have that right?
You have it right, according to me.
Yeah, sounds right to me.
Okay.
The one other item that we haven't discussed is surcharges and the wording that would not require us to have the surcharges suspended if we do not do a 218 in a timely manner.
Yeah, so we have discussed that in the prior workshops, and we will make sure that there's effective dates on those surcharges, but not end dates. So we will make sure that happens so they will not sunset.
And hopefully we'll get it in balance so we don't have to worry about surcharges. We're a long ways away from that. Thank you.
You know, I disagree with what Director Weed said here, but however, I do agree with Director Weed that I think it may cost too much, it might not be worth it, but the concept of putting a low flow meter on my meter, I think I'm all for it. I'm ready. I'm willing to see what it changes. And if that could be done, I'm certainly volunteering to get mine done. However, I, look to staff and say, well, maybe it's not worth it, and we just continue at the rate we're going. But I kind of throw that out there. I mean, we're a captive audience. I know I'd be in support of getting the new AMI meter to see how it works. And then also, hey, I got it too, in case anybody doesn't like it. It would be, hey, I'm not anybody different. I know some of the senior staff has already gotten it. I don't know how many. Certainly, our finance director's not going to be part of the study, but and that's okay. But I'm willing to put one on my house if staff wants to come out and put it on. Wouldn't break my heart.
But the key to this is to keep both meters in line. So now you know what the difference is. You're not estimating what it might have been.
Yeah, I don't know if we could fit them both in my box, but whichever, yeah.
Then you put in a second box, but they need to have 2 meters in line.
The second box might not be worth the effort, but yeah.
The data is important to us because we're talking about millions of dollars a year that is up, that we can get a real handle on, and we can get a handle on it by next month.
I have a friend who just completed building a custom home. And I believe that he was charged close to $40,000 by the water district to put in his new line from the street and new box. And he was complaining vociferously to me about that. But then on top of that, he had his sewer lines that he had to pull in as well. So it was a considerable expense on a new home.
So I'll just jump in here real quick. I believe we've provided guidance to staff. Can I get confirmation that we've provided everything needed?
Yeah, we've got everything we need, and we'll be prepared with a 1-year Prop 218 proposal for the board to consider at the December meeting. It will be based on a 6% revenue increase to the service charge and no increase to the commodity charge. So the commodity charge will stay the same as it is today, which is $4.59.6 per unit.
Wonderful. Okay, with that, I believe we can conclude item 5. We'll move on to item 6, general manager's reports, and I'll look to Mr. Stevenson to see if there's anything to report on.
Thank you, President Akbari. We actually do have 3 quick GM reports. And for the first one, I'll turn it over to our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Just a brief update that next Wednesday, we will be holding a couple of community virtual information meetings with a drought update by our water use efficiency team. We're modeling this after some of the outreach presentations we've been doing. And so we'll be having a lunchtime presentation on November the 3rd and also a 6:30 p.m. presentation. We'll make those available to our customers on Zoom, and we'll be noticing those as special board meetings as well in case any of the board members do decide to tune in. So just want to make you aware of that, and we'll be sending out additional information soon.
Thank you, Ms. Heides. And Mr. Groom Awoke, our Director of Engineering Technology, has a quick note for the board as well.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members, public and staff. I just wanted to give you an update on the AMI project. I know we talked about it briefly in this presentation. We have a public meeting coming up on November 16 at 6 p.m. The purpose of the meeting is to update the public about the project and follow up on things that were discussed in the previous meeting in March 2021. If people missed that meeting, we will have an opportunity to share with them information about the project. The project has completed the initial phase of meter deployments. Approximately 3,300 meters have been installed, and it's progressing to the next phase of meter deployments. And consistent with that, as I said, we have a virtual community meeting scheduled for November 16 at 6 p.m. We'll soon be advertising for that meeting. Will be a refresher for customers who may have missed this meeting, the first meeting in March 2021. What we will do as part of the next phase of deployment is that we will send out commencement letters to customers, and that letter will contain details about the project and what they can expect. That's my update, and I'll take any questions if there are any.
John Weed, there are been some significant changes in technology in just a short time since we approved the project. Badger now for $50 can give you a remote cutoff on a meter. Everything else the same. They're going to start rolling that in December. Neptune has a meter that you can remove the electronics and have it tested separately, so you don't have to do flow test. It can be an electronic test and soon be able to ship it in and come back with a different, you do an electronic testing and save yourself time and money. So the technology is rapidly changing. I encourage us to stay on top of it. We only did the smaller meters, not the larger ones. I suspect we'll be going to AMI for the larger meters, and hopefully we can get some lessons learned. Also, pressure testing. That's not included in our current plan, but is capable in the technology. So I would encourage the engineers to look at, we took what I argued at the time was a premature technology and didn't support the project, but we do still have time to catch up as we do the remainder of our water service. So thank you.
We will certainly be following the technology changes as they occur, for sure. So finally, under GM reports, John Wunderlich, Director of Finance, has a quick update for the board.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Stevenson. So CalPERS goes through what's called an asset liability management process every 4 years. And essentially what that is a comprehensive review of key assumptions regarding both assets and liabilities. So for example, key assumptions regarding assets can include things like investment returns for different asset classes, as well as the investment portfolio allocations to each asset class. And then key assumptions regarding liabilities includes things like future salary growth, retirement ages, inflation, and life expectancy. CalPERS has been going through an asset liability management process this year. Staff has been monitoring the process, and we just this evening wanted to make the board aware that at CalPERS's November meeting, their board is expected to make some decisions related to that process. We do not expect substantial changes to assumptions about liabilities. In regard to assets and asset allocations and investment assumptions, CalPERS is evaluating a range of investment portfolio candidates with discount rates between 6.5% and 7%. 7% is their current discount rate. And of course, we currently fund our benefits assuming a 6.5% discount rate. So they are not looking at anything that would result in a lower discount rate than our current funding policy. But we did want the board to be aware of what was going to be happening at that November CalPERS board meeting. and staff plans to present the results from that meeting to the Finance Committee in December. And that concludes my report.
And President Akbari, that completes all of our GM reports for this evening.
Wonderful, thank you. We have no other items on the agenda. So at 7:07 p.m. tonight, we will adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.